Yeah,
We've just been talking about it for years, you know?
when I was younger and single, I was thinking about working on the docks. And not the docks, but, trying to get one of those freight things just for travel's sake. And it's like a bunch of money, and you're not really spending your money because you're just on the boat the whole
Yeah,
time.
it's a great job for like kids, you know, like not
Yeah.
kids, but like young adults. But like, it's such a like, the environment isn't great. Like, there's not many people of color. It's like very racist, very sexist.
Yeah, I
Like,
could see that.
it's just a horrible time. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And like, if you have like any forward thinking in your brain, they just like call you a pussy. And
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
you know what
yeah,
I mean?
exactly.
Like,
Yeah, I do a
it's
lot of
just like,
construction.
man, this is terrible. I hate being
Same.
here. Like hearing people talk about their wives, and you're like, man, just fucking get
Yeah.
a divorce.
Yeah,
Jesus
exactly.
Christ. Like,
Yeah.
it's terrible.
Yeah, the toxic masculinity in the work environment, in like hard work environments where you're physically at it. It's
That
always
and,
like a toughen it up type energy. You know what I mean? Like,
for sure, it's
shake it off.
male dominated
Yeah.
industry, and like toxic masculinity just seethes through there, and like
Exactly.
tons of like homoerotic jokes all the time, but
Yep.
like also very homophobic. Like
Yeah,
at the
yeah.
same time, it's like crazy. It's a tough time for me to be there, but
Even the ones that like seem like they're kind of cool, they still have like those backhanded jokes and shit.
oh
like that.
yeah, there were like a lot of times where like I thought that I had made like an ally,
Yeah.
and then they would say something, and I'd go like, all right, like,
Yeah, I know where you stand.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you don't know that, you don't know this yet, but you just told me something without
Yeah,
telling me something.
exactly,
so.
exactly. But so let's go ahead and introduce you. I get we kind of got started
Right on.
right away. But yeah, so this is Ignorant the Podcast, season 2, podcast where I invite people to make my listeners and I less ignorant to who they are, what they do, how they do it, why they do it, their experience in life, the perspective they have on life, and just their story all the way around. And so with that being said, on my show, like I said, I have no biases or like I have my own opinions and stuff, but I'm not married to them. It's like, and this is a very important podcast because I've just this subject has been so huge for the last forever, but like really now it's getting like worldwide and just like
yeah,
really
a lot of
being,
visibility for sure. It's
you know
also
what I mean?
great timing. Next week is Trans Visibility Week, so
perfect.
I
And
don't know-
I'm
I don't know
releasing
if
this
you had
next week.
intentions of doing that,
I
but
did not.
Nice.
That really worked out perfectly.
nice.
But yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself. I like for people to do it themselves.
Oh,
That
for
way
sure.
they
Yeah,
can
my
be
name is Holden
authentic.
Althouse. I am from a small town in Northwest Ohio, about an hour and 40 minutes from here, called Findlay.
Okay.
It's about 40,000 people live there, 40 to 45,000 people live there. Very conservative sort of place, not a lot of diversity, and I exist there as a trans man. I'm a queer youth advocate. I am a heavily involved in the community, the queer community. I am the chair of the Pride for Findlay for 2022, so it is kind of getting better. There is like a Pride festival,
Yeah.
very cool. But yeah, so I've just been, I stopped sailing a couple years ago. I've just been home and seeing that there's like a real need for visibility of trans and queer people in the community, and I have just kind of stayed out of spite to make that visibility happen.
Yeah. Okay. Great. That's great. So go ahead and tell us more about your role in the youth, and what does that mean? Exactly?
Yeah, so like I said, a couple years ago, I came home and kind of decided to do a career change, and was just like I had attended, like reached out to. There's a nonprofit in Findlay called Spectrum, which is the queer community resource nonprofit basically. So they're who organize Pride. They organize the. They have like an LGBTQ adult group. They have a youth group. So I had reached out and I was like, hey, like I'm very interested in volunteering for Pride. And the director at the time, I just like never really expected to be received in this way, but she was like, yes, I would love to have you get more involved in any way that you have capacity to. We actually have this youth group, so there's a safe space for kids in Findlay called The Loft. It's run by another nonprofit, but they kind of collaborate to run. So this nonprofit runs like an after-school program from 3 to 6 o'clock every day. Okay. And it's primarily, it's open to everybody, but primarily there are like a lot of gender non-conforming youth that kind of go there and spend a lot of time.
Okay.
So I started going there and volunteering. I go every Wednesday. I hang out for a few hours, and just kind of be like the big brother, like trans guy, like existing in this place and not having a horrible time, just to like show these kids that like hang in there, like there's still hope. You know what I mean? And like things will get easier. And if you have any questions or like you want to know like what my experience has been like I'm incredibly open to these kids and also their parents and also the community, just to like provide insight. That way it seems like less heavy for them to like move through life.
Yeah. Okay, great. So it's like I have so many ways that I don't even know like where there's so many questions and kind of ways I want to go about this. I guess first we should probably start with your story. Like how did you get here and how did you get to realize who you were and stuff like that.
Yeah, so
where did this journey start for you?
It all started in 1990, in August 24th of 1990. I was born to my parents. I have two older sisters. I have two younger brothers. I'm the middle child. We were kind of raised very blue collar, paycheck to paycheck kind of family. So my parents weren't really home around a lot. So we were basically like latchkey kids.
Okay, yeah.
And so kind of just growing up, not really understanding in a place where there's like a lot of like wealth, like not a lot of wealth diversity. That you're either really rich or you're really poor. So I kind of got like kind of chastised for being like the weird kid, the poor kid. I always smelled like cigarettes because my parents smoked in the car, like all that stuff. So like I was always sort of the outcast, and for a lot of reasons, I was the outcast, and I didn't really realize why at the time. So I'm like 12 years old, and I'm dressing, in boys' clothes, right? And I'm just comfortable in them. I feel myself in them. My parents don't really care. They don't really understand. But like, my mom's like, my mom has always been like her kid's biggest supporter. Like, she wants them to express themselves. She wants them to do all of that, like, kind of self-expression, introspection, like figure out what makes you happy. You know what I mean? And my dad, not the same. He's always just like, he'd catch me putting on his like cologne. He'd be like, "That's for boys," and I wouldn't understand because I was just like, it just makes me feel good. So I don't really understand. So, a couple years later go by, I start realizing like now I'm in like the heat of puberty, and I'm like,
so you'd say like around 12?
Probably 12 or 13.
Really
what I mean? I'm like, man, I think I like girls.
Yeah.
But from what I've been like told and like from what I'm seeing in society, like that's kind of not normal. That's like not something that we talk about. I've never seen like a queer person before in my life at this point. And so I don't have any way of knowing like if this is a thing, if there's something wrong with me, those kinds of thoughts and feelings came up. And my parents were never like super like, not that they weren't interested, but there were a lot of us, right? And they were busy. And like, so like, I feel like there was never like those conversations of like, who are you? What are you going through? Like, I didn't really have a ton of that guidance. And so when I like realized that I was not like everybody else, I was like, oh, okay, well the word for this is lesbian, right? So like I was born a female. I am attracted to females. This word is lesbian. And so like the progression kind of went, I'm bi, because I didn't want to be like completely shunned and outcast. So I was like, no, I like boys. But all the boys didn't like me because I was one of the boys basically. And then I didn't really want them to like me anyway because I was truly like attracted to women. So, I identified as a lesbian for a really long time. I dated, a lot of women on and off. Came out as trans actually 2 years ago. Kind of was sailing on those ships like I was telling you about, and was just having like a lot of like discomfort, and for a lot of reasons, right? It was not a great environment. It was very toxic. I didn't feel safe as a female, and I also didn't like feel like I was a female. I was like, the thought of gender alone made me like very uncomfortable.
Did they like talk to you like female, like use she and her and like?
Yeah, so they did. They used she and her. I mean, they'd call me like a dumb bitch and shit because like they could, and they could talk to me that way, and nobody was gonna stop them because they'd all been together for 25 years, and I was just like some random motherfucker from Ohio that was just out here working and like doing my best. So so I'm having all these thoughts, and like I'm existing in this space where like I'm hearing a lot of, and this is where like trans visibility starts to kind of peak up in the media. You know, Caitlyn Jenner, you know, trans sports, trans athletes in sports, and like, and everybody has an opinion, and none of them are like positive. You know what I mean? So I feel like very uncomfortable because I don't feel that way. I don't feel like, and I've always been very like pro trans, pro be yourself. I've never really understood what like the binary of gender, because I truly believe that everything is so incredibly fluid. Yeah. So as I like get older, I start realizing with myself, and I'm like, I'm on this boat, I'm stuck. I'm like, TikTok is just like starting to come up, and I'm like, my For You page is literally just like trans dudes. And like, and I'm like, what does this mean? And like, so I'm like, you know what I mean?
TikTok's trying to tell you something.
I'm like,
look, just step out. We know, you know.
So TikTok's like, hey, look at all these trans dudes, and I'm like, that's cool, you know. And like, so for the longest time, what I thought was that I was just like a really good ally. You know what I mean? Like, I was just a huge pro-trans ally. I'm like, I'm queer. I've struggled in my like walk of life, and like it's so much harder for a trans person, and I can see it in the media, and like I don't agree with it. And so I've always been like very vocal about that. So then I'm on this boat, right, getting back to it. TikTok's like, look at all these trans dudes, and I'm like, that's really interesting. And then I like start thinking about it more, and I'm like, what are these feelings I'm having when I'm seeing these? Like, I'm proud, like I'm emotional, like when they're like getting top surgery or starting their hormones. Like, people share their journeys on TikTok, and I'm like feeling a way about it. And I'm like, well, should I be feeling a way about this? And then I like start to like finally come to terms with the fact that like I'm jealous of these people because they're living their truth. And like, I genuinely like, I like sat with myself for a long time. I was like, damn, am I trans? Like, because for years I was like
denying it.
Yeah, for years I was like, no gender, please don't perceive me. You know what I mean? And like, it was just so uncomfortable for me, and like, and I'm like getting emotional, and I'm looking at these trans guys going through their experiences, and I'm like crying at night, and like I'm so miserable on this boat, and I don't feel safe. Donald Trump is you know, potentially getting elected for another 4 years. Like, this is in the heat of it all, and I'm just having a hard time. And I come home, you know, I leave the ships. I come home. I sit down with my mom. My mom and I live together, and I go, hey, I think I'm trans. I've been thinking about it a lot. I've been having a really hard time. I don't think I want you to call me my dead name. I think that I would like to be called Holden. I would like for you to start calling me your son. I think that aligns with me and how I feel. I would like to start taking hormones. You know, at this point, I'm almost 30 years old, and my mom's like, okay, you know, that makes sense, you know. And I'm like, so I come out to my mom, and I'm like, fucking, I've got all these siblings, you know. And so I'm like, okay. And I reach out to my sister, and I send her a message, and I'm like, hey, what would you like? How would you react if I like told you that I was trans? And she was like, honestly, I've been waiting a long time for this conversation. I was like, what, you fucking, you knew? Like, all these people were basically like just receiving me like, yeah, no, that checks out. Like, we get it.
How do you go about that?
Yeah.
You know?
And so like, I've been like, I'm slowly having this like very hard conversation, and every time I'm like, expecting to be met with like a ton of opposition or like invasive questions. When it comes to like my close friends and my close family, everybody was like, hell yeah. Like, that makes a lot of sense. Like, do what you need to do to be happy. That's what 100%. We want for you. So, you know, I started that process of, it's like the experience, I can only speak on my experience, but my experience has been that there's a ton of labor involved in the transition process. So like, you are seeing therapists, you are seeing doctors, you have to have like all of these like professional people like agree with you that you are who you say you are before you can even start like your, you know, your gender reassignment journey, if that's something that you choose to do. Not everybody does, you know, not everybody wants to do hormones, not everybody wants surgery, and that's totally cool.
So that's something I think a lot of people are like. So, like I said, the podcast is called Ignorant. There's a lot of people who may not be against, but they for sure still are ignorant. You know, because they're like,
no doubt.
So like, I guess what is that difference between someone is, or how do you define it when someone's trans but they're not like transitioning, or like, you know what I mean? Like, what
Yeah,
is
so like what I like to tell people is that like every trans person is completely valid in their journey. So
Yeah.
like what I've met and like what I've understood in like the past is that people are like, "Oh, you're trans, like have you had the surgeries?" And what they want to know is like what is in your pants? And like I don't care
Yeah.
when I meet anybody what's in their pants unless I'm trying to sleep with them. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? And like
see, like as like
you know,
as a dumbass pothead,
yeah.
I'm that guy. Like, and I honestly, like, that's why I started this journey too, because it's like I have the most craziest questions, especially when I'm smoking.
Yeah.
Like when I'm smoking, I literally just sit there and be like, "Wow, how does this work? How does that work?" You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And literally, I'm that guy. Like when I'm working or when I meet someone, because I'm a bartender, and like sometimes, at least especially back then, that was my first thought. When somebody told me they're trans, it's like, I mean, they have a penis now. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
and you know, it's just, it's not like I care necessarily, but it's also like, as a curious person, you never know, like, you know. But
Yeah,
that's also
so, like,
some people are always like, curious about that, like, because you know you get these new employees and stuff like that, and you hear what they went through, or you know, their journey, and there's just always just random curiosities that just are talked about, like the locker room talk. You know what I mean? But like,
Yeah, for sure.
you know.
So like I'm not sure how to like approach that answer. So like every trans person, like regardless of like what decision they make to do with their body or like how like deep into the process they are, like if someone tells you like I'm a trans woman,
Yeah.
even if it's your brother,
Yeah.
now she's your sister, and like that's that. And like
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's just like getting people to understand that like I'm trans, I identify, these are my pronouns, like no matter what it is, it should just be that.
Yeah,
That's
so no
what
matter
it
how
is, you
far
know
they
what I
are
mean?
into the journey, they're still as respectable.
So,
you know,
yeah,
trans, you know,
absolutely.
it's
And
not-
like even you know even if people don't want to do those things, they just want to you know dress feminine, you know,
Yeah.
dress feminine, dress masculine, have the proper pronouns.
Yeah. Do you see a lot that like for people that may have just been gay or lesbian their whole life, as now that as trans becomes more normal, they're like, well, they're stepping into that role, kind of like how you just said you were identified as lesbian,
So
and then
yeah, I think that the language has not been like available to
yeah,
a lot of people in society. So like I said, when I was growing up, you were a boy, you were a girl.
yeah,
You were straight, you were gay. There were no in-betweens. You were invalid if you were an in-between of anything. And like there's not like an influx of trans people because it's like a trending thing to do. There's an influx of trans people in the media and like in society because there's now language for people to be able to recognize like, oh, what I'm feeling is actually this. I've been given these words to choose from to identify myself, and what it actually is this, and this is what I like. This is where like the reality of my life and my journey is.
okay,
So I think that getting back to like the first question, like, and I understand the curiosity, especially of people who like don't have a ton of interaction with or have maybe never met a trans person. Like there is like there's such a broad spectrum, so like not everybody wants to be like cisgender passing. So even like, you know, like even though I'm a trans man and like I am very like masculine passing, and like people don't really clock me as trans is what I'm trying to say. Like they're like, oh, that dude over there, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? But there are plenty of trans people who like to like gender bend basically and like just push the limits and be visible as like as visibly queer as possible, and like it doesn't matter how they look, what they tell you they are is what they are, and like it's at face value, you know what I mean? Like and that's how it should be. So those questions of like, oh, have you had the surgeries, like do you intend to have them, like those are incredibly like, I don't want to make you feel bad, but incredibly invasive questions.
yeah, exactly,
and like
100%.
so like it's not something that's like, oh, yo, like, are you trying to have these surgeries? And what it should be is like, so what has your experience been? Like, how is that going for you? Like, those are much better questions because like, I'm going to share with you what I want to share with you. But if you put pressure on me to tell you like, if I have a penis, I'm immediately going to clock you as like an unsafe person because you know what I mean? And like, and I know it's not intentional and a lot of people don't do things or say things to be harmful, but like that's the reality of it. Yeah. So like the most important thing for like trans people and kids in general, children across the board, but especially trans kids because they do have like a huge target on their backs and like have
kids are ruthless.
Yeah. Kids are ruthless. Adults are ruthless. Yeah. You know, and like because of there's like this fear of trans people, like they're out to do harm, and what actually happens is that a lot of harm is done to the trans community or the queer community in general. Yeah. So it's like really harmful because like the first questions, right? So like pick a trans topic that like you've heard of that you may or may not have an opinion on, like bathrooms.
Yeah.
Right? Like
I wanted to talk about that. I don't have an opinion on them. And my favorite bars, they don't have gender.
Why are gendered bathrooms still a freaking thing, dude? It's 2022. Yeah. Like there's like this coffee shop back home, and they just spent all this money remodeling, and they chose to do like men and women's bathrooms, and I'm like, wow, you had this opportunity to just put two bathrooms in here and like not make it weird. People don't even realize like. It's those little things that are actually inclusive to. Yeah.
But so then there's some things about that. Like, do you think for places where kids are able to be at, that it could be a dangerous situation for, like some adults to be sharing bathrooms with, like you know what I mean? Like there might be an adult that's like a red dot on the map. And they probably shouldn't be in the same bathroom as a little girl, you know what I'm saying? Or
you shouldn't let your kids go to public bathrings alone.
Yeah,
that's my opinion. Like, don't leave your kid alone. If you're worried about their safety, then don't leave your kid alone. Yeah. I think that a lot of the argument with like trans women in bathrooms with little girls, right? That's basically what you just said.
Yeah, my question though had to do with
but this is a broad thing that gets said, right? Yeah. So like, well, I don't want. That's a man. He could be a predator. What if a predatory man dresses up like a woman and goes in and assaults my daughter? Yeah. That's a question. That's an argument that's been an argument for over a decade now. For sure. What you're saying is, what are we doing about these men? Yeah. What are we doing about these violent men that are a danger to society? And it has nothing to do with trans women. And like honestly, if you're gonna go through all of that. If you're going to go through all of the trouble to dress up as a woman and enter a women's room and like assault a woman that has nothing to do with trans women, that's just a man who's like there to do harm to people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's exactly that's what I'm talking about too. Not even just anybody that is as trans or anything.
Right. So like, am I worried about kids' safety? Absolutely. What's my solution? Monitor your children. Yeah. Am I worried about women and their safety? Yes, absolutely. What is my solution? It's not be harmful to trans women. It's to be on guard and like be a better community so that there's one more understanding about trans people and inclusivity, which creates a safer environment. Basically, what I'm saying is the likelihood of women assaulting a trans woman because they're afraid that it's actually a man there to assault them is more likely than a man going through all of those steps to pose as a trans woman to assault a woman. You know what I mean? Like that man is going to be a fucking shitbag no matter what. And that exists on a daily basis. So like this one instance is not necessarily like the end all be all or the root of the problem in the first place. Yeah.
So what other other than that, what other? I want to save sports for later, but what other controversial topics are there that you think should be talked about?
So like I think that
on trans, obviously.
Yeah, no, obviously. So I think that it's important for people to understand sort of the process of what it is like to transition. Why people, decide maybe to not change their name legally, why people maybe decide to not take hormones, why people maybe decide not to have surgery. And a lot of that has a lot to do with accessibility. I'm an incredibly privileged person, and I like to make that like abundantly clear. I exist in the world as a white man now, and the privilege that comes with that is that I have a white collar job. Yeah. I have health insurance. I have a supportive community, and I won't say I haven't faced violence as a queer person, but since I've come out as a trans man, I have faced like very little adversity. So like,
I want to keep talking about that. So like, have you actually felt like more privilege? Is that what you're saying? Like, from being looked at as a woman to being looked at as a man, like,
so like,
and I mean like when people assume right away, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, oh, what up, bro? Like, do you feel like they're getting hooked up more? Or like I don't even know the right word for it, but you know what I'm saying?
So I've noticed a lot of things, right? So like I have a partner, and I've noticed, for one example, is that like when my partner and I go to dinner, my partner normally pays. You know, they are like, especially if I come to Detroit, they live in Detroit, they know what's up, they take me to these places, they take me on a cute date, and then they end up paying. What I've noticed is that the server will 98.57% of the time slide the bill to me, and then I laugh and I push it right over to my partner because like I'm not paying that shit. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
she wanted to go out, not me.
So and so like I have noticed like people, like, you know, if I'm in a group, people will start to listen to me over somebody who's maybe more feminine presenting. People will start to like value my opinion over someone who's maybe more feminine presenting. If I speak, people are listening. You know what I mean? And not all the time, but like it feels that way for the most part. You know, people, like I said, clock me as a man because I am a man. But like I'm very like cisgender passing at this point. I've been on hormones for almost a year now. And like, so my voice has changed. I have a little bit of facial hair, like all of these little things that make me look like I might maybe be.
You're all tatted up.
Yeah.
I mean, at first look, without you talking, you look like you could smack somebody.
And I just might, you know, like, I just might. And like that's, you know, I've spent like my whole life kind of cultivating this look of like, stay the fuck away from me. Because I've been in places where I've been unsafe, and I've been in places where I haven't felt strong or capable or, you know, like seen for who I truly am. So like I've got this porcupine armor, you know what I mean? Like I'm just like, everybody stay away from me. I don't want, you know, and then it's up to me to make those connections with people because like first glance, right? You know, I live in very white, very suburban, conservative Northwest Ohio. You don't see people like me all over the place. And like you do see tattooed people, but not really as heavily as I am, and not really as like, you know, like I wear shirts with like, you know, like protect queer youth on it. You know, like I wear shirts as a billboard of like, this is what I'm about, and like fuck with me if you want to. And people generally don't. And so like I have noticed that the amount of privilege that I have, not even in male privilege, but just as like, you know, like I like people to know, like, let it be abundantly clear, like I have great health care. I have access to that, which is great. I have a car. I have access to travel, which is great. Not everybody has those things. I get to walk through the world as a white person. That comes with an abundance of privilege that I can't let go unnoticed. You know what I mean? Like, to be a black trans person, a black trans woman, specifically, their walk is much different than mine. And like, you know, the ability to be on hormones, the ability to, you know, like I had to pay to change my name. It's like, okay, it's $140 to go to court and change my name. That's cool. Then I got to wait 6 weeks for that paperwork to come back. Then I got to take that court paperwork, and then I got to fill out all this shit to change my social security card. And then once I get all that shit, another 6 weeks from now, and you know, another $50, and then I got to go change my birth certificate documentation. So I take all that other shit that I just had, and then I go change my birth certificate. That's another $150 or whatever. You know, it's like it's costly, which is why people don't have access to money and funds like that. Like gender affirming surgeries are thousands of dollars, even with insurance. So like,
is that like cosmetic? Like what is that? What kind of medical is that?
So. No, I mean, gender affirming surgeries are recognized under most insurances as like a medically necessary procedure. Hormones save people's lives. Gender affirming surgeries save people's lives. And that's just the facts. That's with data. Like 1 in 3 trans people have have attempted suicide.
Yeah, sure. I was just curious how it gets logged in the system.
Yeah, for sure. So when Obamacare hit, actually, it made gender affirming care more accessible, but still not really, because then you've got every individual state and their laws, and maybe how many gender affirming surgeons there are in the area. Like, so I actually have surgery coming up in June. I'm going to Connecticut.
Okay. Because you can't really do that here or in Ohio.
So there's actually there are like a handful of surgeons in like the Detroit area, which are like highly regarded for gender surgery. There are also a few surgeons in Ohio. The stipulation that I found was because I was using my health insurance and not paying out of pocket, that I like to find somebody in network was a little bit more difficult. So I'm going to Connecticut because I have friends and family there who love me and will take care of me while I'm recovering. But what I was saying was just like Obamacare basically made it so that people who were on state insurance had accessibility to these surgeries as well. But that's only if you have a surgeon who is willing to accept state insurance or whatever insurance you have. If not, most of them are plastic surgeons, with the exception of like for top surgery, if you're getting like breast augmentation, top surgery, which is like basically a double mastectomy. A lot of these things, they're cosmetic, where they're like a plastic surgeon can do them, and so plastic surgeons get the most bang for their buck if they don't accept insurance. You know what I mean? People are paying out of pocket, and they're not probably doing a lot of these surgeries if they're not accepting insurance for this kind of thing, because
they can just choose what they want, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So like there are I feel like accessibility to like gender affirming care is a lot more so like an East and West Coast kind of thing. There's like a lot more like, I hate to say the word liberal, but like it's a lot more like left leaning on either coast, right? Yeah. So like there is like more money, more funding to do studies, more funding to kind of give accessibility to people, to be like aware in communities, things like that. Whereas like the Rust Belt, I live in Ohio and like Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, like in up north and south of all of those states is like kind of this gray area where like some places are safe, some places are not. You may get care here, you may not. Like the laws, in Florida right now, they're trying to pass the Don't Say Gay law.
Don't say gay law?
Yeah. So basically what that means is like it sounds cute, right? You're like, oh yeah, why is this still a thing? Like, why? Let's get rid of that. You know what I mean? Like, let's not say that. But what the law actually says, and like in the bill that they're trying to pass, is that it basically gives access to, like, you can't talk about gender or sexual orientation in school anymore. So like, queer kids have to like basically go back in the closet, or they can face like repercussions. Teachers can now contact parents if they find out that kids are queer in school and out them to their parents, which is very unsafe and also very triggering for me. I had an experience when I was in high school. I had a girlfriend, and like one of the math teachers like called her parents and told them that she was gay and was dating me, and then she got like beat, you know what I mean? And like we were not allowed to talk, and she was just punished for just, I'm like, what do you do when you're a freshman in high school and you have a girlfriend, bro? You're just holding hands and walking down the hallway, like you're not doing anything crazy. And so like it's super triggering to me to like hear this, because like I have experience of this, and it's really fucked up and it's really unsafe, and you're creating like a lot more of a division between like I think that it's two things, right? It's parents who try to take ownership of their children, instead of like
that's always a problem.
Yeah, it's like you don't own your kid, you don't own their body, and like
basically just guide them.
Yeah, and what you're doing when you try to like put your thumb on them and make them be somebody that they're not is you're creating a ton of like what's the word I'm looking for? Basically, your kid's gonna hate you. You'll be
long
lucky.
story short.
Yeah, you'll be lucky to have a relationship with them once they turn 18, because they'll be free to be who they have always been, and that you've never like accepted them for. Also, if you're not letting your kid express themselves when they're a kid, literally, what is the harm in letting a kid maybe change their name, not legally, but like go by a nickname? Consider it a nickname. Yeah. Kid picks a new name. like at this youth group, these kids they stay changing their names, bro, and like they're like, oh, hey, Holden, today my name's Raccoon, and I'm like, all right, all right, bro, and like, and then I just call them that because like the worst thing that could happen is that they go home and they go, man, Holden really sees me, Holden helps me feel like I'm valid, even though my name's really not ever going to be Raccoon legally, likely. Like these Gen Z kids are crazy with it. Like their pronouns are wild. This kid the other day was like, "Hey Holden, I changed my pronouns," and I was like, "Okay." And I was like, "What are they?" And he was like, "Just trash." And I was like, "Man, I'm gonna have a hard time with that. I won't lie. I don't think you're trash. I think you're an incredible person." So like finding the balance of like respecting these kids and like their journey is really something, but like also kind of uplifting them and letting them know like, hey, don't talk about my friend that way. You know what I mean? Like, let's find like a more positive way to refer to yourself as like. It's just been a challenge, you know. I think like the Don't Say Gay law is really harmful. In Texas, there's a law they're trying to pass which jails parents that get their kids gender affirming care. They're calling it child abuse.
Yeah.
Do you know?
I think I did just read something about it.
Do you know how many parents are supportive of their trans kids?
Yeah, that I don't. I do want to talk about that. I was gonna ask you.
I don't have a number for it, but it's not a lot.
I was gonna say, in your experience with how's your
my experience with the youth that I work with
and their parents.
And their parents. I know, like I said, almost all of these kids are trans or gender nonconforming. Only 2 of them in the group of probably 30 kids that I've met and see every week have parents who are supportive of them and their gender affirming care. I met with a kid, so I started this program with Spectrum. Basically, I heard a bunch of kids talking about
Spectrum Gym.
Spectrum is the nonprofit.
Oh, okay.
So
okay.
the queer nonprofit. So I had basically started doing this out of my own pocket and like didn't really tell anybody about it. But like I heard these kids talking about how they wanted binders. So a chest binder is basically like a really tight sports bra. You know what I mean? It just like kind of eliminates the visibility of your chest. Okay. It helps to alleviate chest dysphoria. It doesn't harm anybody. You know what I mean? Like there are a lot of benefits to it. And the other side, like the negatives of it are if you don't like provide kids with these things, they will find ways to do it anyway, which are likely very unsafe. So like duct tape, ace bandages, saran wrap, you know what I mean? And like I've known many people who have done it. That shit will tear you up. Like it can damage your body permanently. Yeah. You know, you could get lesions and sores. They can get infected. You could like permanently damage the tissue in your breast, which actually reduces your ability to get top surgery if that's something that you want in the future. And so like I heard these kids like, yeah, I want to buy a binder, but my parents won't like order one for me. And I was just like, I'll do it. Yeah. Like I'll buy you one. I don't care. Yeah. Like you know, I'm talking. Oh yeah, I just put on like 3 sports bras and they're all too small for me and I just can't breathe. And like I have these crazy welts when I take them off and I'm like, holy shit! Like please don't do that. You know what I mean? Like I will get you one.
Kids will find a way to do what they want.
Kids will find a way to do what they want, so why not give them the resources to do it safely? Yeah. What's it going to hurt? You know what I mean? Like, that was my whole thing. So I started this program where I was like, all right, cool. You fill out this form. You tell me who you are. Yeah. You tell me what size binder you need. Yeah. You tell me if your parents are cool with it. You tell me if you want help talking to them about it. Yeah. And then, like, we'll go from there, right? And, like, you have to attend... I have like a safety training basically where I'm like, these are all the things that you should not be doing. This is how long you should be wearing this for. This is how you wash it. These are the things that could potentially happen if you don't do these things, or if you do, or if you are practicing like unsafe binding. I just want them to be fully aware of their situation, of their bodies, and like so that they don't do like permanent damage to themselves or harm themselves in a way that's like irreversible, essentially. Yeah. So I started this program. It's been going really well. And basically, I was doing it. I was paying it out of pocket, and I told these kids, I was like, "Hey, I'm just one guy. You know, I'm just one regular ass guy with a regular ass job." Like,
yeah. How much does that cost?
They're about $43 a piece.
Oh wow.
So I was paying for those out of pocket, and then Spectrum, the nonprofit, they had heard that I was, you know, hey, we heard that you've been showing up every week to the youth group. Like that's amazing. We love that you're so passionate about this. We also heard about this. What are you doing? And I was like, oh yeah, you know, like. it's this or that. Like it's literally like it sounds so extreme, but like supporting trans and like gender non-conforming kids, like it even in the slightest way, using their pronouns that they prefer, like 1 out of 10 times at home, like increases like the increases the thought of like that kid feeling like safe and included in like like loved in their home. If their parents, you don't even have to be good at it, you just have to try. Like you could actually be really fucking bad at it, you know what I mean? Like, but if you use your kid's preferred name and pronouns once out of every 10 times, they're like 80% less likely to like harm themselves.
No, at least know you're trying. And
yeah,
they'll know that you're trying. Like
you're
say,
trying.
even if you're bad at it,
could you do better? For sure, everybody could. But like, like at 80% chance, letting your kid express themselves without changing their body, without without gender affirming care, like hormones or surgeries or things like that. And like we can talk about that in a second. Like there's like a lot of hoops that you have to jump through. Like it's not like I came out and was like, oh, I'm trans, I'm a man now, like beard, you know what I mean? Like it was like it's like a really long process and like a lot of hoops that I had to jump through to even have like access to this care. And this is again going back to the fact that like I'm incredibly privileged. So like it was a very hard time for me, and I have like all of this access to things that a lot of people just simply don't have. So like I just go back to like, what is it hurting? What, like, you're not hurting these kids by calling them a name that makes them feel good. You're not hurting these kids by calling them pronouns that feel like they align with them. And like they might change. All of that might change. Like I said, some of these kids change their shit every week. Yeah. Like, and I do my best to be like, all right, you're just trying it out. Like it's not hurting anybody. Yeah. And you're just trying to find yourself. And I think that like what I think will happen is like as this, it does seem like sort of trendy, right? But like there's still only like 1.8% of the population are trans. So like you're seeing an influx in visibility and maybe an influx in people like kind of exploring gender, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's like the end all be all of the journey for them. You know what I mean? And especially when you're a kid, I think that it's better for kids to be doing it when they're 13, 14, 15. Some kids realize that they're trans when they're like 8. And like thinking back on it, like I've there were many red flags in my childhood that could have led me to this conclusion much sooner, but like getting like, again, I just don't see the harm in supporting a kid while they like try to figure themselves out before they're like sent into the world to like do life shit and then also try and figure themselves out, because that's where you figure out, like that's where people kind of spiral, that's where people kind of lose. Mental health is like very important and like a huge part of like the queer community. Like I think it's like 1 in 3 trans people that have like attempted suicide. Yeah, that's crazy. They're like 60. Hold on, I pulled it up.
Yeah, like I said, have all of it. I'm don't want to get to the point where we can just throw our stuff on the TVs or whatever.
Yeah, nice.
It's getting there.
So so like cisgendered kids, 7% of people who had like filled out this survey at the Trevor Project. So the Trevor Project is like trans like resources, basically. That like a suicide hotline. Okay. They kind of have like a community fund for people who need help. Yeah, things that's like good. That. So it's just really cool. It's called thetrevorproject.com.org. Sorry. So they had done this study where it was like 7% of cisgender kids had like admitted that they had attempted suicide, where you're trans or gender nonconforming, it was 35%. Seriously considering suicide in the past year, cisgender kids said 16%.
When you say cisgender, can you break that down?
So oh my bad. Yeah, so cisgender is literally just you were born, your gender identity and the sex that you were born are in alignment. So like you were born a male, you identify as a man. That's a cisgender person.
So it's not like a feminine or masculine thing. It's just a.
It's just So it's like.
Like, it's not like they call it like this. I guess like I want to make sure it's not like part of like sister or like cis or like feminine, like is it? So
cisgender is literally like you were born a female, you identify as a female. So it's like your sex that you were born with and the gender you identify with are the same, and they have been your whole life. So like you're not trans, you're not gender nonconforming. You are the gender that you were born, and the sex that you were born. Yeah. So that's cisgender is just like boys that were born boys, girls that were born girls, who identify that way. Okay. So, and that's another conversation, you know, like there is the difference between sex and gender. So like you may be born a sex, but you may identify as a different gender, and that might change throughout time. Yeah. So, you know, 16% of cisgender kids were seriously considering suicide in the past year. Transgender kids and gender nonconforming kids, that percentage is 44%. Felt sad or hopeless for 2 weeks or for more in the past year. 30% of cisgender kids felt that way. 53% of trans kids felt that way. As far as victimization, 10% of cisgender kids have experienced sexual violence in the past 12 months. 31% of trans kids have experienced sexual violence. Threatened or injured with a weapon at school in the past 12 months. 5% of kids that were cisgender have experienced that. 24% of trans kids have experienced that. Felt unsafe going to school in the past 30 days. So this is specifically youth, right? So like 6% of cis kids felt that way, whereas 27% of trans kids felt unsafe to go to school. So those are some numbers that basically highlight the mental health aspect. Like the importance, the influx of visibility of trans people is very important because it creates that open dialogue for like, hey, we don't feel safe. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like everybody deserves to feel safe. Yeah. Sure. And so how do we get there? Yeah. And that's a big part of the conversation that we're having, and like that needs to continue to be had. Well, my partner actually was asking me last night. They were like, "Do you believe that kids should have access to hormones and gender reassignment surgeries?"
Yeah, that's a big question.
Yes, I do. Yeah. And they were like, "Oh, I'm not really sure that I do," because like basically what we've talked about, they basically had said like, well, it seems as though like being trans is like rather trendy right now, right? Like it's trending in the media. You're seeing an influx of trans people. You're seeing, you know, more people kind of experiment with gender, things like that. And my question for them was like, what is like the harm in like supporting a kid who feels as though they are, you know, are trans, they're gender nonconforming. So that their concern was that we're getting to this age where like, right, I'm 31. So like there are many people my age who have kids who are growing up in this like incredibly saturated social media where like there's a ton of trans visibility and it's like almost trendy to be trans or to be queer, and like people may take advantage of that just for attention or whatever. And so, I'm like, no, yeah, I understand that. But, like, do you understand, like, the process that you would have to go through to even have access to these things?
It's important.
Yeah, it's very important. So, like, so they're like, we're gonna have like all these like woke parents who are like, of course you're trans, and then they're just gonna run and get their kid that care. But really, what it is there are so many laws like trans care, like there are all these laws constantly coming up to like eradicate trans people, essentially, make it harder for trans people to be visible. There's not a ton of data because like they just like didn't exist basically.
It's finally being respected.
Yeah, well, it's being noticed at least. Respected is
respected enough to be written down.
Pretty strong word for that.
Documented.
But
yeah.
So, excuse me. So, basically, what I was telling them is like you, as a youth, like it's way like the hoops are way smaller to jump through. You know what I mean? Like you have to have like 2 years of recorded therapy, where a therapist like agrees that you are gender nonconforming before you can either start hormone blockers or start hormones. You cannot start hormones as a teenager until you're 16 years old. Okay, so I know that. Like you don't have access to that even if you wanted to.
Do you think there is a too early time for the hormones and stuff like that? And
so I'm a huge advocate for hormone blockers for that reason, right? Like I am currently experiencing what I like to call second puberty, where like I went through puberty as a woman when I was in my teens, and now I'm going through all of the puberty signs of like a teenage boy. So like my voice will crack, like I've got like bad acne, you know, all of those things. So like hormone blockers. So like if your kid came to you and said like, yo, I think I'm trans, I'm sure that the conversation would be like a lot heavier than that, and it wouldn't be so casual. And like my hope, my dream is that like one day, it's so like talked about that it's like not even a question. It's just like, hey, we've got all of this language now, and I'm realizing and recognizing that I'm transgender, and this is what that means to me. So like, and there are like, it's such a spectrum, you know what I mean? It's still not like just man, just woman. There are so many like genders in between that nobody really talks about. And so I'm again a huge advocate for hormone blockers, because what that does is like that puts that puberty on pause. So it stops you from developing, you know, if you're born a girl, it stops you from developing breasts. It stops as a male, it stops your voice from dropping. You know, all those things. So you're like on hormones. It stops puberty from happening.
And none of that can be like dangerous or anything, or
no. I mean,
maybe not dangerous, but
you're just like then a late bloomer. You know what I mean? Like you're just experiencing that a little bit later than most of your peers would be. But like, no, it's not damaging. I think that it's actually truly helpful, because then like, you know, if a kid truly is trans, and like I like to assume that when a kid says they're trans, that they genuinely are, because it's still like as talked about as it is, or as trendy as it may seem, it's still like an incredibly violent and like very scary thing to admit to yourself. And then you're just constantly in fear for the rest of forever that like someone's gonna find out and they're not gonna like it. You know, so when you're a kid in school and you're getting, you know, beat up all the time, or you're like, you know, getting it's like very isolating, where like people don't, you know, you're not allowed to be in the girls' room because you're not a girl or you're not a boy or whatever, you know, and like then you're just like you're in your own changing room, you're using your own bathroom, and what you really want to do is be recognized as the gender that you're presenting as. And so like it's incredibly isolating and like very challenging, and you know, creates more opportunity for like an unsafe environment, basically. So like I do support kids having access to that kind of care, because even if 2 years down the road of therapy and they've been on hormone blockers, they decide I don't actually want this. I would rather them have puberty late as like a cis person than to you know, like go through all of the like pain of existing in the world as a trans person without like, and then having to like revert. So there are people who like detransition, and like what that is like people who would transition maybe, for example, there are a couple of like kind of TikTok like famous people who have transitioned female to male and then detransitions, meaning stopped taking their hormones, maybe had top surgery, but like are now, you know, starting to like express themselves more androgynously, maybe more feminine. And what those people are realizing, and what like the world needs to realize, is that gender is incredibly fluid, and the pressure to either be a boy or a girl like puts pressure on people to make that decision, maybe like preemptively, like without like truly exploring who they are. So getting back to like the youth situation, like I definitely agree with giving kids access to these things, because it's so difficult and there's so much time involved, and there are so many professionals that like have to qualify you essentially as an adult, but like twice as much as a kid. So like I definitely support that. You know, like I know one kid at my youth group has had top surgery and is like on hormones, and I'm like,
how old is this kid, if you don't mind?
He's 17. I think he's a senior in high school.
When did they start this transition?
So he had I think he just started hormones a few months ago, but he had top surgery when he was like 16. So like, you know, like had been identifying as a male, just had a very supportive mother, you know what I mean, is very involved in the community himself, and so is she. Like she runs like the parent support group through Spectrum.
The way you
know
said
what I
it,
mean?
like, you said like she's like a Karen kind of.
No, she's not. No, she's really nice. But like it's so the parent support group. I understand that it can be challenging to be a parent of a queer or trans kid, and like not really understand. But like it goes back to like. It always goes back to like we need to stop the visibility of the binary man or woman, because there are like 107,000 ways to express yourself and your gender, and like what we need to stop worrying about is like the gender of people and like genuinely just start to like learn the person as a person, like just start seeing humans as humans, and that's it. Like, you know, like I get an impressive amount of male privilege because I look like a man, but we live in a world where men are like seen as like have more value than women, which truly is not the case. That's not what I believe.
And that's definitely switching over to women
and I support
running the
that.
show.
You know what I mean?
No.
Like,
I think the only reason why women have not been as great as they are now is because men were the gatekeepers. Men were able to, you know, hush them up and put them down, or like hide them, or like. You know,
exactly.
Even some
so like
the
challenge and the struggle continues, right? So like solidarity with women. I lived a lot of my life as a woman, and I understand the struggles and the challenges and all of those things. I've experienced a lot of horrible things that a lot of women experience, and now like I get to exist in these like male dominated spaces where a lot of times people don't know that I'm trans, and I get to hear
change from within,
and then I get to hear them and like clock them for who they truly are like right away. So when they, you know, you get into that locker room talk and everyone's talking about women like they're just pieces of meat, and I don't have anything to say because like I don't you know what I mean? Like so,
it's good to just sit and be quiet in those situations because you really get to learn people.
Like I have a lot of like I love people watching. I love just dissecting people's personalities. I've spent a lot of time like in like that isolation, right, where I'm like really don't feel like I belong anywhere, don't really feel like I get along with anybody, which is kind of silly because like if you knew me in my community, like I'm well known. Everybody knows me. Everybody like knows and loves and adores me because of who I am as a person. And then I'm also a trans man. You know what I mean? So like in my community, I am that person, and like I'm trying to like when I say that I'm like a queer youth advocate, I'm trying to just take up so much space as this like openly queer person in this like very small conservative town, so that these kids realize like, hey, this place can work for you. You don't have to stay here. I encourage you leaving, but like
definitely get the fuck out.
I'm just
no
here
matter where you're from. You should
I'm
get
just
out
here
for a
because
little
I'm
bit.
mad about it. You know what I mean? But like just being visible and like being that support for kids who maybe like, you know, like these kids talk to me about their parents at home, and I'm just like, your parents suck, bro. Like, I'm so sorry. Like, you know, there are kids who will tell me like, oh yeah, my parents like found my binder and then they beat me and then they lit it on fire in front of me, and I'm like,
that's fucking
really,
crazy.
like I'm really sorry that happened to you. You know what I mean? Like that is fucking crazy, bro. Like
fucking crazy. Like because like all these things I have my own opinion, especially like about the sports stuff, but like I never take it to physical, or
you can't. You can't
put somebody down or hate somebody.
Yeah, you can't put yourself in the shoes of a person who's walking this life, and let alone like having parents who are like violently against your being.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I
You're
mean?
existing.
Like, you're like, this is who I am, and they're like, no, the fuck, it's not, and you're like,
and it's so big and so serious, but also so stupid because it's like hopefully 50 years from now, we might just be like, remember back in the early 2000s, we gave a shit about people's genders and stuff like that. You know what I mean?
Like, that's the dream, honestly.
Now it's like, you know, hopefully then it's like, it's just all love and
but like what's crazy to me, like these poor kids, like I feel for them. I really do. Like I want to be that support for them because like I don't think that these parents realize that it's literally life or death. Like it sounds so extreme.
I think a lot of just people in general don't realize.
Like
it's like that.
You are making this. It's such an isolating experience in life, and like even with support, and so. Like when your reaction to your kid telling you that they're trans is to beat them and like burn their binder or call them a faggot or whatever it is and tell you like no kid of mine is gonna be this way, like what you're doing is telling that kid that like nothing that they do is ever gonna make them feel safe or loved by you
or accepted.
And like, you know what's worse than accepting your kid or just tolerating your kid and their identity is like finding them fucking dead someday.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is a serious reality. And I don't think people truly understand, like, even trans adults attempt and commit and complete suicide, like, at a much higher rate. I think when I got involved in the youth, I had read some crazy statistic, like 78% of homeless youth are displaced queer youth, so like got kicked out or ran away because they didn't feel safe when they came.
Sense, yeah.
So like I got really passionate about it because I read that and I was like, holy fuck, like that's terrible. Like I don't want anybody to feel that way. I want, like, my pipe dream is to like create and open like housing for displaced queer youth. So like there are places like this around the country. In Columbus, there's one called Kaleidoscope House. So like you run away, you're 15 years old, you end up getting like sex trafficked or addicted to drugs or both. And while I am like not anti-sex work and I'm not anti-drug use by any stretch of the imagination, I mean, I think addiction is fucking terrible and like we don't talk about that enough either. But like when you think about kids doing this shit, you're like, I support people using drugs and I support people doing sex work, but like
I think
you can't consent as a kid. You can't consent as a kid. Like you're actually just a victim. And like I don't necessarily want kids to feel like that's the only way that they can survive. So like again, pipe dream, right? I would love to be able to provide resource and support for all of those kids. And like then you get the devil's advocate, right? Like, well, what if this kid runs away because they find out that Holden's place is just cooler than it is at home? Yeah. You know what I mean? And then my question to you or the parents is like, why is it cooler than your house? Yeah, why doesn't your kid feel safe at home? You know what I mean?
You know what I mean? What is it?
So like I'm just trying to make kids feel safe, but like I also have to protect myself, so I feel really intertwined in this community and like in this youth group, and like some of these kids have like my phone number, some of them know where I live, and I'm constantly like, do your parents know that you're talking to a 30-year-old man? Like, and I'm not like grooming, I'm not having any conversation with them that would ever be inappropriate. You know what I mean? Like I'm not grooming these kids. I'm not inviting them to my house. They just like, it's a small town. They know where I'm at. Like I'm the fucking guy with the purple house. Everybody sees it. You know what I mean? So like, it's just like I'm a little nervous because once these parents realize that like I'm supporting their kid in a way that they're not, are they going to come for me? Are they going to say that I'm a predator? Because it's easier to say that than it is to support their kids. Like these are worries of mine as like a queer youth advocate. But like I think that it could,
as long as you're legit though,
Yeah, and like I work
legit in like you gotta formalize your.
Yeah, I mean, I'm moving in the right ways. Like I'm not, like I said, I'm not inviting these kids into my home. I'm not creating any opportunity for like
them to even think wrong. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, it's nice doing that because you never know. What parents could be going through, and they do have the right to be worried or whatever.
For sure, you should like.
They should.
That's my question. Do your parents know that you have my phone number? Do your parents know that I've given you a ride home? Like, do your parents know who I am and what I'm about and who I'm with, like who I'm affiliated with, which is both of these nonprofits in town. I'm just like a community volunteer that's very, very passionate about making sure that kids realize that like it's gonna be okay.
Yeah, 100%.
You know what I mean? But I'm so scared all the time as well because I'm just like shit. Like these kids tell me about their parents and I'm like, oh my god, like what happens when your parents find out like, oh, Holden's a trans man, like this fucking pervert's just like making my kid trans, like you know what I mean? Like all of these things can be said, but none of them would be true because all I'm doing is providing the support and like the recognition of self to these kids that they would need to realize that like, like I may or may not be the reason that a kid like is still around. And like a lot of these kids like tell me regularly like, man, you're so cool, like I look up to you, like
that's the best feeling ever too.
They want to talk about tattoos with me, they want to fucking talk about like I love lifting weights. Some of them follow me on Instagram. A lot of my stories are just like me at the gym. Hey, what were you doing? Like they want to know about me. They don't care that I'm trans. They don't want to talk about my trans experience, and if they do, it's genuinely like how hard was it when you were 15 and you were trans? And then I have to have that conversation with them, like, I didn't know. You know, like, I think you guys are so cool because you're so sure of yourselves. And you're 15 years old, and I didn't have this language. I had no idea. Like, I didn't even know trans people existed till I was, like, 22.
Yeah.
Like,
I
had no idea. Like, no idea. And, like, I was like, wow, that's, like, there's a whole world of people that I had no idea existed. Like, and they're just, and we out here, bro. Like, you know what I mean? And so then it's just crazy because there's so many, like, we take one step forward, and then there's 10 states with laws that are trying to ban trans existence again, like the second I like blink. And so like Florida, Texas is trying to fucking jail parents for getting their kids gender affirming care.
I don't put nothing past Texas. Texas laws and government, like
and putting those kids in foster care. And so like, what are the statistics of kids in foster care? How many of them get assaulted?
Exactly.
How many of them get, you know, are mentally or physically abused? Like, is anybody thinking about what's going to happen to these kids when you rip them out of homes of parents that love them and see them for them and are getting them the care and the help that they deserve? You know what I'm saying? Like, no one's thinking about these kids. Oh, we're doing it to protect the kids. Like, no, dude, you know how many kids are going to fucking die because of this shit if this shit goes through? If you really start, like, enforcing these laws or these bills or whatever, it's just crazy to me. Like,
I hope a lot of that doesn't get.
And they use it under the premise of like, oh, we're just trying to protect children.
Right.
And you're not. You're just being a transphobe, and you're and you're using like all this rhetoric, and you're scaring people into thinking that like their normal kids are not safe around these trans people or these queer people.
Yeah, like it's contagious or something.
Yeah, exactly. It's not. Like all these kids want to do is be seen for who they say they are.
And express themselves.
Yes. They're not like, it's not a personality trait. It is who they are as a being, and the fact that like people don't understand what a trans person has to go through to be recognized as trans in the first place. And then that's part of like that's why I was happy to come on this podcast. Like I like have shared my experience with this youth group before of like changing my name and like how long it took a whole year for me to get a license with my name on it after I went to court and changed my name because I had to get doctor's letters affirming that my gender could be changed, and I had to do like all of these things, and like, you know, it's just like so much labor. And so when people don't do these things because of the labor involved, like the emotional labor that is involved in these things, like trans people just won't go through the care of changing their name legally or taking hormones or getting surgeries because there's so much work and it's so like anxiety driven, and then you have to like out yourself and bear who you are to just any motherfucker. And like I live in middle of nowhere Ohio, you know what I mean? Like there's not a ton of inclusivity. I never know how I'm going to be received. I have to like explain to people why my ID says a name that like isn't what I'm telling you my name is, you know, like. So it makes,
or looks exactly how you're looking today.
For sure. I look way different. And so like that's all of those things are just like hard to explain to people. Like you don't understand like what I've had to go through to get here. And then also like you don't understand when it comes to youth, like what I've had to go through as like a white adult male versus like a person of color or a trans youth, like all, and like people with like maybe like financial insecurity, like all of these things come into play. Like it's not just like I woke up one day and was like, I'm a man, and everybody was like, word up, brother. It was like, it was a ton of work to get here and to be recognized. And so like when this conversation comes up, I'm happy to like share my experience because I can really only speak on mine and like kind of highlight like the things that like the youth have to go through, which is like twice as much labor, twice as much therapy. They maybe most likely don't have parents that are supporting. They maybe don't likely have family or friends that understand. And so it's just like this rhetoric of like safety is kind of misguided because the people who are constantly in like a state of like being unsafe are these people that we're talking about.
Exactly.
And not the kids in the bathrooms or the locker rooms, you know what I mean? Those people in locker rooms and bathrooms that you're worried about being assaulted will likely do some really messed up things to that one trans person that just wants to get changed and get on the gym floor. You know what I mean? Like,
so, well, speaking of that part, I guess let's get into sports.
Okay.
It's a huge topic right now, and one of the most touchy subjects for people, no matter how you feel about trans. You know what I mean? So, like people that are still supportive and all that, but then when it comes to sports, they might feel totally different. Where do you stand on trans in sports and competition? And do you have any like experience in that, or have you known anybody?
So
in
I'm
this position?
I'm like unclear on the question, honestly. Like, are you asking me like how I feel about trans people competing in sports in general?
And switching, like, so like for example, there's the swimmer, the college swimmer. Have you read about that story?
I'm not sure. I see a ton of
Yeah.
like opposition essentially to trans people competing in sports pretty regularly. So there's a swimmer. Tell me about the swimmer.
So I guess the swimmer was really respectable swimmer as a male, and pretty much about to be eligible for the Olympics. You know?
Okay.
And then, but because of pretty much everything you explained about the transitioning process and the rules, like I guess the college rule is, if you transition over, you got to be transferred at least a whole year, just to even be to transition over to, like, as from the men's league to the women's league. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So he was already winning like crazy as a male, and then now he goes into the women's one, and now he's just really winning. You know, breaking records. You know.
Can I stop you real quick?
Yeah, for sure.
Anytime. If she's a trans woman, regardless of the life that she lived before, like even speaking in past, you should always use the proper pronouns.
Okay. Yeah, that's like when I was trying to explain it, I didn't know.
Yeah. So she's a trans woman. So like I understand. So but maybe for people who are listening, they might not understand that when you say things like trans man, trans masculine, that generally means people who are born female who present as male, identify as male or identify as more masculine. Trans feminine, trans woman is the opposite. So was born a man, now presents and identifies as a female.
Okay.
So just as an etiquette, you're here to learn.
No,
right?
yeah,
So
sure.
like I'm just trying to help you out.
Yeah, I was literally telling Natalie about that yesterday. I was like, I don't know. Like, yeah,
So like when you're talking about this woman who's a like a really like accomplished
super
swimmer.
respectable athlete on all levels, you know.
Right.
But
so the legality of the college in competition is that she has to have been on hormones and transitioning for a year, is what you're telling me.
Yeah, but really the question is do you think it's fair, or can you see how some people might think it's unfair, or at least in some ways? Because I guess my stance is, I think I just, you know, this is such a tough subject.
You're not gonna offend me. Like, this is right. I'm here to help.
Yeah,
So like your question to me is,
because it's like when you're born a man, it seems, you know, you're born with all this extra testosterone and strength, or you grow into it. You know what I mean?
Some of them, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the thing. Is like there's some freakish athletes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then there's still like the regular athletes that they can still compete against. But you know what I mean? It's like, I guess pretty much because the main question all around is if it's fair, you know. And I personally think if a woman wants to go against, if a biological or whatever woman wants to go against or compete in the men's league all day, I think that is okay. Because I think if you're willing to level up and say like, hey, I think I can compete with those guys and be better than those guys or those people, whatever it is, then great. But then when it comes down to switch it to the women's league, do you think that could be unfair, or do you think?
So what I'm hearing, and I don't want to make you feel bad, is a bit of misogyny.
And like I said, I totally understand that, you know, I'm ignorant, but also this.
So what I'm no, it's not that tough. Yeah. I'm happy to talk about it. So like my opinion is this: there are again laws, regulations, legalities when it comes to competitions. If it is that you have to identify as a trans woman for a year, it's likely that she's probably on hormones. I know that for like Olympic weightlifting, if you're a trans woman, you have to like prove with blood work that you have been on estrogen. For like your levels have to be at a certain amount in order to compete as a woman. If you're a trans woman in like Olympic lifting. So this is just an example. So like, and it goes reverse. So like if I wanted to compete in Olympic lifting, I would have to show blood work to say that my testosterone levels are this is my weight, and then they would go like that. I personally think that it is pretty rude to say that like men are more capable than women, because I know a lot of women that are a shitload stronger than me, and could smoke me in any kind of like foot race. And this is like, and I've been on testosterone for a year. Like, so like when it comes to athletes, what I think is that these people, regardless of gender, train incredibly intensively to be the best version of themselves in competition. So I don't know what the issue is when it comes to trans kids competing in sports or trans people competing in sports, because like it's still a competition, and I don't think that anybody genuinely has an advantage. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think that when you get to that level of like almost Olympic like greatness, you know what I mean, in a sport, like I don't know that there is much of a difference between like male and female. I don't think that you should like limit people to being competitive, especially if like I said, like in like Olympic lifting, you have to prove like blood work that you have been like on hormones, and that you like basically have the same amount of like estrogen levels or testosterone levels as like the average male or female. Yeah. So,
and I can see the laws being kind of good, right? Because then you have, if someone's just competition hungry and it's just like, I'm losing at this level and want to go to this level, like that one, I don't think that'd be okay. Like if LeBron, now that LeBron's getting older and he's like, well, I can't compete with these young cats, and he just wants to go to the women's league.
Do you genuinely like? So let me ask you this: if you say you were in a boxing match, you got smoked, bro. Like you just got absolutely obliterated.
Yeah.
But you've been training for this boxing match for 2 years. You've been going hard. You've been eating right. You've paid all the right coaches. You are peak performance, and you got smoked. Would you then, like, I genuinely am asking you this, would you say, I'm a woman, I want to box in the women's league? Like, would you identify as an opposite gender just to have that satisfaction?
No, I wouldn't. But
no, but and that's my point. Like, people wouldn't ostracize themselves by saying something so controversial as I am trans.
Yeah.
Just for the sake of competition.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there is no time where it's all good.
Yeah.
There's no time where like a cisgender male or a cisgender female, and right, like, so what you said was like, oh, it's cool if women want to go to the men's league because like it's more competitive.
No, I'm saying because like I don't think, like if a woman wants to go play football, I think by all means do it, you know. But then I think if a man wants to go down to like the women's league, I just feel like it might be dangerous, you know.
It's not, but it's not a man wanting to go to the women's league. It's a woman who was born as a male.
Yeah.
That is now being true to themselves and now being and on a level of like all of this like national attention, right? When you're a competitive athlete of that stature, everybody knows who you are. Everybody knows what you're about. So you have to come to terms with yourself and put yourself on display. When I came out as a trans man, I did not put myself on display for the whole world to see and have an opinion of me. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where I'm leaning is like, I don't think that like trans people in sports should be an argument, because no cisgender person is going to go, oh, well, I can win the gold medal against the women, no problem. Because men are better than women, or, you know, like the competition is easier or anything like that. Like, you wouldn't put yourself out there if it weren't truly who you were, is what I'm saying. And so, like, then it goes into the, like, do you have to take hormones in order to compete. Like if that's part of it, then they have their own regulations. So like if she's following regulation, I don't know why she shouldn't be able to compete. When there's trans kids playing sports in high school, you know, like nobody's got an advantage when you're an awkward fucking 13-year-old. You know what I mean? Like nobody has an advantage there. And so I think that like there are like have been laws and like bills and like regulations being tried to pass through schools with trans kids competing where they're like, there was one recently that I had read a few months back where you could basically like if you assumed a kid was trans, you could take them into a room with an official and make them strip. And I think that's really fucked up. Yeah,
you shouldn't be allowed to make any kid strip or any human strip like for any reason.
And so like I think that that's gonna open up like.
What is this you're talking about?
So let me look it up. There was it was in the news not that long ago about this. Like maybe a school was trying to. I don't want to sound really ignorant, but it was something that I had read.
This is the place. No, I'm just kidding. You're supposed to be the one.
I mean, I'm still ignorant, man. Don't get me wrong. But like, basically what it was like a proposition of like, oh, if trans kids are suspected of being trans in sports, we need to pull them out. You know, that girl, you know, might be trans. Let's pull her into a room. Let's make her strip. If she's not a girl, then she's not allowed to compete. And if she is a girl, we've just violated a child. Yeah. And at any rate, you're just violating children. Yeah. So, like, nobody, like...
Even getting a physical sucks. Like, for sports.
For sure. And so, like, and they've already done that. You know what I mean? Like, they've already been to the doctor. They've already been training. They've already been identifying as...
Yeah, it's they couldn't have gotten the legal.
You know what I mean? Like, so there's no need to, like, ostracize children. And also... that opens up, like, I don't know if you know this or not, but there are a lot of predators in the education system. A lot of grooming, a lot of, like, sexual misconduct, like, in all schools across the country. It's not, like, designated to one spot. Yeah. So, like, you know, then it opens up, like, oh, we could look at that girl. We could say that she's trans, and then we could all just get a good look at her. You know what I mean? And, like... that's like it's just opening up doors to like violate. Yeah, pretty much. They can be like, we notice you're a little stronger than the rest of these women. Exactly. Let's make sure you're a woman. And exactly. And that's really, really unfair to everybody. Yeah. You know, like everybody's a victim. Like when that's something that you want to be a reality for yourself or for your sport or your athletic program. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like when go ahead. Go ahead.
So I guess maybe people are make the assumption that when you're born a man, or you're just naturally and always stronger. Well, physically stronger. Even if you're dumb as a rock, you might be born extremely physically strong. Or
that's not always the case, though. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like every human is like incredibly different. Like, what's your body type? You know what I mean? Like, what are you eating? What access do you have to better yourself? Basically, like what resources do you have? I am physically stronger than a lot of men. Yeah. And it's not because I'm on testosterone. It's because I train like a fucking animal 6 days a week.
And that's another thing. So people say that, well, they're on testosterone, blah blah, and any regular athlete is not supposed to be taking anything. Like, what's that argument? Or how do you?
What's my argument for that?
Well, not your argument, but how do you respond when that's there? Basically, I'm just talking how responses you see in the media and
let's use me for example. Yeah. Let's use me for example. Let's say that I was gonna compete. Yeah. In an Olympic lifting. I'm not an Olympic lifter, but let's just for the sake of saying it. Yeah. Let's say I was gonna compete. The normal male's testosterone levels are from like in between like 600 and 1,000 nanograms is like the measurement. Yeah, so in between 600 and 1,000 are like the numbers. So if I'm going to compete, I would have to get blood work that proves that I'm within range of those things. Okay, so I would have to take a drug test. I would have to prove that I'm not on steroids. Everybody, you naturally produce testosterone.
Yeah, for sure.
So I don't. and I never will. And I will have to continue to take it every day of my life, or some people take it every week, some people take it once a month, depending on their levels, where their like their goals are, all of those things. But like, it's not an advantage to me because I'm like, you know what I mean? Like, it is an advantage where like so the side effects are like, right, I have grown like muscle density. I am stronger because of it, but also in part with that, I have like tuned my diet all the way in, and I have like trained really hard for a long time. And like, so I think that when you're like in competition and you already have to prove that you're not doing drugs, that you're, you know, your levels are right. Like, it's not like I have an excess of testosterone in my body. Like, I'm not more of a man than an average man. You know what I mean? I'm within range, which is the goal. So like, I don't think that it's fair to be like, oh, well, that guy's on testosterone, of course he's stronger than me. Like,
what about the opposite for hormones on someone that's born male? How does hormones affect their body?
So estrogen will kind of like make people softer.
Is it the same? I'm sorry. Is it the same thing? Like, do women take the same type of hormones that?
No.
Okay.
No. So women take like progesterone and estrogen are the two like feminine hormones. Like, everybody has all of these hormones in their body, which is like another conversation. But like, so when you're like a trans woman, you're taking like progesterone and estrogen. It's going to like, you're gonna like lose muscle mass.
Okay.
You're going to like get a lot softer. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to have to train twice as hard to like maintain yourself, essentially. And you'll likely lose strength. You'll likely lose like endurance, things like that.
So is it safe? So it's safe to say that maybe that athlete did tone down their like muscle mass and all that by taking those.
Yeah, I mean, you have to train.
They basically like
if you
even
like
the playing field.
So if you started,
that
not that this is like something that you would ever do because that's not how you identify, right? But if you started estrogen today, a month from now, if you were if you went to the gym every day, 5 days a week, and you've been doing this your whole life, you go to the gym 5 days a week every day, you have like this mass, you have like this aesthetic, you've been maintaining it, it's been great. Now you take estrogen. A month from now, if you haven't done anything differently and you trained with the same intensity, you're still going to lose muscle mass because your body isn't creating all of the testosterone that it needs to maintain the muscle that you had.
Okay.
So you'll have to train twice as hard to just maintain yourself.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So that I could see why some of these regulations are fair then in a sense.
I don't know that like
sports wise.
I genuinely like do not give a shit about sports. So so like this argument isn't really one that I should be having, but like I'm happy to like give my opinion in a discussion of like, do I think that this is fair? These are the ways that they're making sure that people are competing.
It's still
fair.
you had a solid argument for someone that's not even in the sports.
Yeah, I genuinely do not care about sports.
Still,
I don't understand the like
hip to a lot,
yeah, but
sure.
like you know, and like so the regulations of like having to prove that your hormones are at an appropriate level, that you're not on steroids, that you're not using drugs, all of those things, like they do all of those things to make it fair. You know what I'm saying? Where like I know, again, many women who would smoke me in competition over and over and over again. And I have the advantage of being on testosterone, and I'm still not nearly as competitive or as strong as a lot of the women that I've come across. So like I have a friend who is an Olympic lifter, is trans feminine, and is starting hormones in like the next couple of months, and is also going to like the Olympic lifting nationals in Salt Lake City. So like she is like highly like regarded and will be on hormones, but will still lift and compete with the men.
Oh wow, okay.
But
so
just
it'll be on the estrogen.
She'll be taking estrogen and progesterone.
So she'll be pretty much at a disadvantage and still be trying to.
And still be, I have like a lot of confidence that she will still be like a top placing.
Yeah.
Like she she brought home 3 medals from the Arnold a couple weeks ago.
Oh, shit.
And placed for nationals. And so she's going to nationals in 6 weeks. So she's training. She's like, in a training period for the next 6 weeks where she's lifting every day. She's eating, within specs to maintain, because when she starts taking those hormones, she's going to be at a disadvantage, but she's still going to compete against the men.
Yeah.
Because her levels aren't going to be where they need to be to compete with the women. So she's still, you know what I mean?
Does she want to compete against women? Or?
I don't think so. She identifies as trans feminine, so not that she's a trans woman. So trans feminine is sort of not she identifies as non-binary, but she leans more towards the feminine side of the spectrum. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So she wants to take hormones. She wants to have a smooth face, no facial hair. Yeah. She wants to look softer. She wants to present as a female more often. But she still has no intention of gender affirming surgeries or things like that. And that's where I'm not trying to speak on my friend as a way to kind of out somebody, and I haven't said her name or anything, but I'm not trying to speak on somebody to out somebody, just to give you perspective of not every trans person is a trans man or a trans woman. There's this whole spectrum in between, and the decision to take hormones doesn't mean that you're going to make the decision to have gender affirming surgery, or that you've ever even thought about changing the way your body looks. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's just so much. It's so broad, and the spectrum is so broad that it's almost impossible to limit it. Trans man, trans woman is limiting. Gay and straight is very limiting, because there's so many there's so much in between that we just aren't talking about. So the base level of this conversation is what we've talked about, right?
Man, we just scratched the surface.
We just scratched the surface, and we could literally be in this podcast room for the next 12 hours. You would leave here exhausted with all the information that you've got.
Yeah, we are coming up on an hour and a half, but definitely I want to bring this back. If like I said, anytime you're in town and you want to talk or you want to use my platform.
Yeah, for sure. I'm happy to be here. I'm glad that we had the conversation. Is there anything else that you wanted to ask me before we dip?
Well, is there anything that you think needs to be addressed and talked about? Some of the things that you brought up with Texas and Florida. Is there any other things that people should know about or spread awareness on? That's definitely a major thing on my shows. I want people to come out here and to help spread awareness.
Yeah. So there's a couple things that I would like to say. The first one is that next week is Trans Visibility Week. I implore everybody to do a little bit of Googling, kind of educate yourself where you can. Don't put it on the trans and queer people in your life and in your community to educate you.
Yeah.
It's exhausting. So I'm here having this conversation. I'm happy to do it, but when I get put on the spot, ask Holden. He's trans. Yeah. He knows.
Yeah. And not everybody is meant to.
Yeah, and also if you know a trans or queer person, don't introduce them as trans or queer. It's not your business. It's not anybody else's business. I am openly trans. I'm here to help bring awareness and visibility to the community. But if I'm out with for example, if we're out at the bar and you're yo, that's my homie Holden, he's trans. We're not friends anymore, bro, because that was rude. Yeah. It's very unsafe. You know what I mean? 100%. So don't
It's just the labels. It frustrates you, but at the same time, people, it needs to be. It's important, but at the same time, it's I always felt that same way.
It's important, but it's for me to tell. It's not for everybody to know unless I'm comfortable with everybody knowing. And so, do your best, everybody out there, to not out your homies, because you never really know if they're comfortable with that, and that's not for you to share.
Yeah, it's almost like talking about your sexual preferences. Oh, hey, that's Matt. He loves to eat pussy. Yeah. Why would you introduce me like that?
Yeah. Right. I mean, you're not wrong, but that's pretty weird.
Exactly.
Weird. Don't do that.
It's okay.
Yeah. So I implore everybody to kind of take some time to visit the Spectrum of Gender, the trevorproject.org. I support. SpectrumofFinleyLGBT.org is the nonprofit that I do a lot of work with. I implore you to check out their website as well. See what they're doing for their community. See what you can do to get involved in your community.
I was just going to say, this is our community, and the LGBTQ trans, it's huge here. Huge, but also we as teachers are ignorant and are trying to find the right resources and the right education to be able to help our students. That was another reason why this podcast was so important to me, because I'm a busy guy. I'm on my computer all the time, all that, and I'm not really one of the teachers myself, but I get to know these kids and I work with them. Like,
no doubt.
I'm the community liaison. I realize what needs to go on around here and what the community wants. And sometimes, like, the most random things, like, kids just tell me, like, walk up to me, tell me they're suicidal, or that they're getting bullied for this or that, or, it's like, it catches me so off guard, and I feel bad, because sometimes I like say, man, that's crazy, like, I'm sorry you're going through that, or it's like, I need to be more educated on that, but also this can be a space for you to bring any word you want here, or if you ever wanted to talk to some of our kids, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'm definitely like in the process with Spectrum of like kind of developing programming to like offer sort of these insights. I wouldn't call them trainings per se, but not necessarily at least, but like, like help. My kid said they're trans. What do I do? And then like you meet with me and I'll talk to you for 45 minutes about like what you can do to be supportive and what you absolutely should not do to ostracize your child. You know what I mean? Or like there's been a lot of times where I've had like personal experience of like being dead named over and over again in a doctor's office after I've repeatedly said like, that's not my name. Well, if you don't have a state ID, we can't recognize it. And I'm like, well, then what's the point in you even asking me what my preferred name is? You know what I mean?
Literally, it's on there, preferred name.
So like, there's just like a lot of times where I'm like, man, I should come back here and just share my experience with this place and how it made me feel, so that I can give people like perspective of like why they maybe should or shouldn't be a lot more like cognizant of the interactions that they have with people and like, the impact that it could potentially make on them.
Exactly. Well, I appreciate you so much for coming on here.
Yeah, man, thanks for having me.
And
I'm happy to be here.
All this tech is all yours if you ever want to use it.
Appreciate that.
We could, start something up. And,
Hell yeah.
Bring on
Talk about some
whoever.
shipwrecks.
Just call me that too, bro.
Yeah.
I do want this to be like a mostly educational podcast, but I do want to have the fun drinking episodes. And smoking, especially because you do get into some deep conversations and emotional conversations.
Yeah, no doubt.
When you smoke and drink, no
doubt.
or whatever, eating shrooms, everything. So I'm all for it. But all right, man.
Cool.
Appreciate it. Thank you everybody for tuning in. This is the podcast. It's Holden, and tune in. Thank you. It's like.